At 8 o'clock on the evening of February 27, 1943, a small group of Norwegian commandos left their shelter and began moving through the frozen mountains. Their target was Vemork, a massive industrial complex built into the side of a gorge in German-occupied Norway. There was an obvious way in, a suspension bridge leading directly toward the plant, and that was exactly why they could not use it. German guards watched the approach. So the Norwegians chose another route. They would descend into the gorge, cross below the plant, climb the opposite side, and approach along a route the Germans considered so difficult that it barely needed defending. If they were discovered, there was almost nowhere to run, and the men entering Vemork were carrying enough explosives to make their intentions obvious. But what they were about to destroy was valuable enough to justify the risk, because inside this factory, Germany was producing something Allied scientists were increasingly worried about: heavy water, and it was connected to Germany's nuclear research. Heavy water looks almost exactly like ordinary water, but chemically it is different. Its hydrogen atoms contain an extra neutron. That difference made heavy water useful as a moderator in certain types of nuclear reactors, and during the war, German scientists were investigating a reactor design that depended on it. That did not mean Germany already had an atomic bomb. It did not. But the Allies could not know exactly how far German research had progressed, and they knew one particularly uncomfortable fact. Germany controlled the most important source of heavy water available to its program, Vemork. The plant stood near Orjuken, surrounded by mountains, snow, and steep terrain. After Germany occupied Norway in 1940, interest in heavy water production increased. By 1942, British planners had decided the production facility had to be put out of action. But destroying it was much harder than deciding to destroy it. Vemork was remote. The terrain surrounding it was brutal, and a direct attack risked heavy casualties. The British tried anyway. The result was a disaster. In October 1942, 4 Norwegian agents were parachuted onto the Hardangervidda Plateau. Their codename was Grouse. They were supposed to prepare the ground for a much larger British assault. The next phase was Operation Freshman. 2 gliders carrying British Royal Engineers would be towed across the North Sea, land in Norway, join the advance team, and attack Vemork. But the force never reached the target. Bad weather, navigation problems, and severe icing turned the mission into catastrophe. The aircraft and gliders crashed in Norway. Some of the men died in the crashes. Those who survived were captured. They were later executed by the Germans. 41 British servicemen were lost, and the 4 men of Gross were now stranded on the frozen plateau. Vemork was still operating. The first plan had failed. So Britain tried again. But this time, there would be no gliders full of engineers. The next team would be Norwegian. The new operation was called Gunnerside. Its leader was Joachim Roneberg. He was just 23 years old. With him were Knut Haukellid, Frederick Kaiser, Caspar Idland, Hans Storhaug, and Birger Strömsheim, 6 men. On February 16, 1943, they parachuted onto the Hardangervidda. Even their arrival nearly went wrong. They landed away from the intended position. Equipment was almost lost. Bad weather slowed everything down. And somewhere across the enormous white plateau were the 4 men of Grouse they were supposed to find. It took roughly a week before the 2 groups finally met. Now the men could begin planning the attack. They knew the factory, they knew the bridge, and several of them knew the surrounding terrain. That local knowledge gave them another possibility. Instead of attacking through the defended entrance, they could go underneath it. Down into the gorge, then back up the other side. It was exhausting, dangerous, and in darkness and winter conditions, potentially deadly even without German soldiers, which was exactly why it might work. At 8 in the evening on February 27th, they started moving toward Vemork. 1 member of the team remained behind in the mountains to maintain radio contact. The others continued toward the plant. From above, the obvious approach was still the bridge. The commandos ignored it. They descended instead, down into the darkness of the gorge. Then they crossed below the factory and began climbing toward the railway line on the opposite side. The Germans had built their defensive expectations around the sensible routes. The Norwegians were deliberately choosing the route that did not seem sensible. Eventually, they reached the railway leading toward Vemork. Now the mission changed. The difficult journey was over. The dangerous part was about to begin. Because from this point forward, a single guard, a single alarm, or one unexpected locked entrance could destroy the entire operation. The team divided. One group would provide cover. The other would enter the heavy water facility and place the explosives. They moved toward the factory. And somehow, they still had not been detected. Inside Vemork, the objective was not the entire enormous industrial complex. The commandos knew exactly what mattered. The heavy water production equipment. Destroying the right machinery could achieve far more than simply blowing up part of the building. Ronneberg and the demolition group moved in. Part of the team became separated during the final approach, forcing Birger Stromsheim to find another way into the cellar. He entered through a window. Now the men were inside the place Britain had already sacrificed an entire mission trying to reach. Explosive charges were placed against the critical equipment. There was no long firefight, no storming of machine gun positions, no huge air raid, just a handful of men working quickly inside an industrial cellar while German forces remained nearby. Then the charges were set. The commandos began to withdraw. Shortly after midnight, the explosives detonated. The heavy water cells were wrecked. Around 500 kilograms of heavy water were lost, and the men responsible were already moving away from Vemork. Not one of them had been captured. Not one of them had been killed. The attack had succeeded without the commandos firing a shot, but now thousands of German troops could begin looking for them. For some members of the team, the escape would be almost as extraordinary as the attack. Ronneberg and 4 others headed towards Sweden on skis. They had hundreds of kilometers of enemy-controlled winter terrain ahead of them. The journey took 14 days. Other members remained in Norway to continue resistance work. Behind them, German forces searched for the saboteurs, but the attackers escaped. The supposedly secure factory had been penetrated, the equipment had been destroyed, and the commandos had disappeared back into the Norwegian winter. It sounds like the end of the story. It wasn't. Heavy water production at Vemork eventually resumed. That point matters. Operation Gunnerside did not magically end Germany's nuclear research in a single night. The Allies still considered Vemork dangerous. In November 1943, American bombers attacked the industrial complex. The raid damaged the facilities, but it also killed Norwegian civilians. Germany then moved toward transferring heavy water stocks and equipment out of Norway. That created one final target: the ferry DF Hydro. In February 1944, Norwegian resistance fighters placed explosives aboard it while it was scheduled to carry the shipment across Lake Tinn. The ferry sank. 18 people were killed, including Norwegian civilians and German soldiers. The battle over Norway's heavy water had become far more costly than the silent raid at Vemork. But Gunnerside remained remarkable for a different reason. The mission had attacked one of the most strategically sensitive facilities in occupied Norway using only a tiny force. The previous attempt had ended with 41 British servicemen dead. The obvious entrance was guarded. The terrain itself seemed like a defense, so the Norwegians turned that defense against the Germans. They went where an attacker was not expected to go. They destroyed exactly what they had come to destroy. And then they escaped without losing a single man. Sometimes the strongest part of a defensive position is also its weakness, because the route everyone believes is impossible. Maybe the one nobody is watching.